Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sid Hines. I am currently the Vice President for the Wounded Warrior Project for Brain Health Strategy and Research, as well as a number of things that um, you can read in a bio. I would like to get the discussion started. Um, Thank you very much for coming to Pink X, understanding and dismantling systemic barriers for Black patients and professionals in the field of brain injury. I want to thank the IBIA for um, really emphasizing these topics and allowing us to have this time. And on behalf of Catherine Snedeker and Pink Concussion, thanks to Abbott for sponsoring this talk. Um, I've been very fortunate to have been a part of the very first Pink Concussion meeting back in February of 2016, held at Georgetown University. And right from the start, Pink Concussion, under Catherine's leadership, has really pushed the envelope of issues in concussion and TBI, especially issues that maybe weren't talked about by the sports concussion world or other TBI, um, venues. Things like intimate partner violence, gender issues, and it was ever so impactful. And Catherine has then gone on and is really exploring all of the aspects of um, female, male concussion related topics, um, and diversifying. And I think this session really shows the direction in which Pink Concussion is moving, and I applaud the efforts of Pink Concussion. Um, Today we have a phenomenal panel. We're very fortunate to have these professionals coming on board and um, giving us their perspectives, telling us about their experiences, and certainly the erudition of their experiences and their erudition on the topic itself. So, to start off, we will have Dr. Kelly Gary, who is from Virginia Commonwealth University. She's assistant professor in the Department of Rehabilitation Counseling. Um, she is also a licensed adult occupational therapist with over 22 years of clinical experience with a number of populations, to include the population of veterans. We also have Dr. Monique Papadis from the University of Texas Medical Branch. She's an assistant professor in the Division of Rehabilitation Sciences at the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston, Texas, and is an investigator at the Brain Injury Research Center of TIR Memorial Hermann. She has a very diverse background, and she is has won several awards, both nationally and internationally, for her presentations. And finally, but certainly not least, Ms. Samira Omar. She is a PhD candidate from the University of Toronto um, in the Rehabilitation Sciences Institute at the University of Toronto. Her research interests are in the areas of human occupation and traumatic brain injury. Our moderator for the panel is Miss Nneka McGregor. Um, she is an entrepreneur with over 3 decades of business experience. She's a co-founder and executive director of the Women's Center for Social Justice. Um, Nneka is going to lead us to a phenomenal discussion. I, again, humbly thank you all for participating. And I am going to turn it over to Nneka and put my ears into high gear and really listen to this phenomenal panel that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sid, for that lovely, lovely introduction to this panel. And I am, again, going to start by acknowledging that I am on Indigenous land. I'm coming to you on this glorious Friday afternoon from my home on Indigenous property that belongs to the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Métis, the people of the Mississaugas. And again, I do all the work that I do because I stand in allyship with Indigenous peoples in Canada, and I'm appalled at how systemic anti-Indigenous racism continues to impact Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse individuals. I'm really honored to be here facilitating this panel with these incredible, utterly incredible women. I wanted to just give you a very high level of the connection between the presenters, and knowing how challenging it is for one to pursue a PhD, regardless of your race and gender. It is a daunting task. But when you layer in race and gender and identity and neurodiversity, you understand how complex and how challenging it is to be doing this, to be doing a PhD, being Black, being a woman in these institutions that themselves are, and I'm going to say it, bastions of white supremacy. And so this conversation that we're going to be having today is with a group of Black women who have taken the bull by the horn courageously in pursuing their PhD, getting their PhD in the instances, in the case of two of our panelists, and still fighting the microaggressions and the macroaggressions that they've experienced as a result of being in these spaces. The panel is extremely unique, as Sydney alluded to, because it's the first time that this type of conversation is being had on this type of sort of global stage. And I know that what you're going to hear this first hour from the panelists is really about the work, their work, right? What they've been doing in the area of traumatic brain injury and how it intersects. But I also want to, again, to echo Sid, my thanks for Catherine, who contacted me at the beginning to say, I'm bringing together this panel of Black women. I don't think I should be the one on stage. I think there should be a Black woman that's moderating it. And Neka, would you care to do it? And when I saw who the women are, I said, absolutely, I'm in. My work as a social justice activist and advocate is really unapologetically centering on Blackness and the experiences of survivors of all forms of gender-based violence, including traumatic brain injury and strangulation. And I've been very privileged to be doing my work in Canada with some incredible, predominantly white researchers and academics. But these women that I've been working with, Dr. Angela Colantonio, Lynn Haag, Catherine Wiseman-Hicks, Vincent Chan, Danielle Tolcolino, these women understand, right, how important it is to center lived experience of individuals who are marginalized, whether it's as survivors or as Black women or as Indigenous women. And I'm just really, really heartened that we have the space to bring these women together to share their experiences. So we're going to start with Dr. Kelly Gary, who is going to give us her 14 minutes and 30 seconds. Right. Over to you, Dr. Kelly. You're on mute. Try again.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. We got you.
You got me? You have my slides?
We can't see it yet.
Oh, Jesus. We have practiced this.
It's all good.
Okay. So let's see. It says sharing screen, but it's not helping. Okay. I am going to go ahead and just talk my slides if that's okay.
Absolutely perfect. You do it.
Okay.
Or I can share your slide.
Oh, you have them?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that would be great. And I'm going to go ahead and get started as she shares those slides. Is that okay?
Well, actually, Kelly, we can't see the slides at all.
Okay.
And I think we're hearing that if you can try again to share your screen.
Okay, I'm going to try it one more time.
Okay, you know what? We experienced this on the very first day.
Mm-hmm.
And as consummate professionals, we were able to do our thing without the screen, and I know you will be able to do it as well. So let's
Yes,
proceed.
I'm going to go ahead and do that.
I'm sharing your slides.
You can, okay, good, great. So so everyone can see my slides. Thank you very much, Dr. Hines. Thank you, NECA, for the wonderful introduction and for allowing me to share some information about a lot of my experiences. I have really come with a little bit of a different perspective. I not only am I a professional, a healthcare professional in the area of brain injury with a research background, but I am also a person that has a traumatic brain injury, severe traumatic brain injury that I've been living with for now 30 years. And I wanted to share a little bit of that experience and how that intersection of not only being a Black woman in a predominantly white field, in healthcare, in an area of occupational therapy, which is predominantly white female, and then also being a researcher and rising to that level, but then also mixing in disability with all of that. So it's a very interesting thing. And what I really wanted to work on or talk about is more of overcoming those unexpected obstacles that I never thought I would have when pursuing independent research in brain injury and academic tenure as a Black woman with a disability. So next slide, please. So as I talk about my journey, some of you guys might see the slides now. This is where my journey began. And Dr. Hines, you might really appreciate this. I started off a while back. I won't tell my age, but I started back off a while back with a totally different journey. That journey started when I went to Florida A&M University, where I majored in the School of Business there, and I was majoring in business administration. While I was there, I discovered the military. I never thought about joining the military, but then as my supporters, my family, particularly my father, started to get ill and as subsequently died while I was an undergraduate, I knew I had to find a way to pay for school. So I joined the U.S. Army Reserve and went to basic training at Fort Jackson back in the late 1980s. And when I came back to school, I said, wow, if I'm going to sign up for the reserves, I think I'm going to go ahead and enroll in the ROTC program, which was very well established at Florida A&M, and become a military officer. So that was my dream. I found my goal, major in business administration. I was going to get I was going to enroll in a 5-year MBA program and become a commissioned officer. And I took that with a lot of pride. Did not expect to do well in basic training, but did extremely well and felt like I had really found my niche. And so that was my story pre-injury. Next slide. Then something happened that changed the whole trajectory of my life. And that is when I had a traumatic brain injury. That happened after the end of my sophomore year. I was had just got received a ROTC scholarship for the next 2 years of school. Was doing really well in school, and really had my purpose. Took a little break right before my junior year started. Went to go visit a friend that was actually at ROTC camp, and we were going to drive back to school together. I fell asleep at the wheel while I was driving on my own, caused a 5-car pileup, and had a severe car accident, which resulted in a severe traumatic brain injury. I was in a hospital somewhere in another state where I couldn't even tell you where I was, and I was unconscious for 2.5 weeks. And after that, I started to emerge from that coma. My mother came to be with me. She was a nurse in Chicago, which is where I'm from, my hometown. She came to be with me, and she decided to, as I emerged from the coma, she decided to air vax me back to the hospital where she worked so I could receive rehab there and she could keep an eye on me. And that was a daunting experience, but it was a great experience because I received great rehab at the place. It was a hospital called Michael Reese Hospital, and that is where I received everything. So I had the car accident. I was in ICU in another state. They brought me back to Chicago. I was in Michael Reese for about 3.5, almost 4 months. And that is where I received the bulk of my acute and inpatient rehab. And it was then that I discovered what occupational therapy was, what physical therapy was, what speech therapy was, what neuropsychology was, everything. I had it all. I started off going to rehab in a stretcher, but ended up after about 3.5 months taking other people down to the therapy, pushing them in the wheelchair and jumping rope. So as when it came to the time that I was about to get discharged, I thought that I was great. I had physically healed. I was doing well. I was back in shape and ready to maybe go back to school. And I didn't realize what really a brain injury was all about. People tried to talk to my parents and they tried to talk to me. I didn't understand it and I wouldn't listen anyway. So I decided that once I got discharged from inpatient rehab, had another 6 weeks of outpatient rehab, which was called community reintegration. I said, I'm ready to go back to school. Everybody told me, no, you could not do it. No, you would not be able to handle it. No, your memory is too bad. No, you will not be able to make it. You will fail. I didn't listen because I had a dream. I wanted to go back and do exactly what I used to do. And so I went back to FAMU without my mother's blessings, without anybody's blessings. I went back and I tried to start off where I left off. Re-enroll in school, re-enroll in ROTC, contact my reserve unit, and just be the person that I used to be. Well, that was a disaster. I was driving my roommate crazy. I was losing everything. I had, my memory was very bad. I would nearly burn the house down. Everything that you can think of that maybe a person with a brain injury might have done, I did it. And within 2 months' time, I realized that I had to fail. So let's go to the next slide, because this next slide is going to kind of, this Wordle kind of gives you an idea of all the things that I needed to do. So as I tried to pursue and get a sense of normalcy of who I really was and what I really wanted to do, I discovered by trying to go back and do the same things that I used to do before my injury, which such a severe injury, I had to reinvent myself. Not all, some of the ladies that spoke about concussion, maybe that's not what they have to do, because when you have a concussion, maybe the memory is bad, or maybe, vision is better, but you might not lose your total thought. a lot of your cognition, issues with information processing, issues with abstract thinking, all executive functioning, all those things you do every day that maybe you don't even think about. I could not do. But even with that, I decided I was going to go back to school and do the same thing. Well, my friends were such good friends, even though I didn't think at the time. They called my mom. They said, come down and get her. She's not doing well. She's not going to tell you. Come get her. And she drove down from Chicago to Florida, and she came and got me. And she said, you tried, you failed, you need to go home. And we're going to try to do this again. And that's what I did. I went home. I sulked for a while. I was depressed for a while. And then I understood I'm going to get back up and I'm going to do what only thing I really know how to do. And that is to go back to school, but not the way that I did it before. So what I did is I went back to a small college near my house. And I reinvented myself. I discovered occupational therapy as a profession. I enrolled in the program. I got really good grades by taking just one class at a time, starting off with remedial classes. And then I built myself up to be able to be where I could function in a full occupational therapy program. Next slide. So I finished with occupational therapy, did very well, was president of the Student Occupational Therapy Association, and moved on. Stayed at home for a little while longer so that I could pretty much, just get the feel of working on my own, and then went off to New York City to pursue my master's, two masters, a master's in public health and a post-professional master's in OT. So that is when I started to say to myself, I want to be on the quest to find out what it is that was an issue with me. What were my problems? I want to do research and I want to study traumatic brain injury. After my master's, I went ahead and I worked in occupational therapy for a while as a rehab director, but I knew that wasn't my total dream. My dream was to do research and be a big advocate for individuals with brain injury. So in 2005, I had already learned about VCU and their PhD program, enrolled in a hybrid online program with the College of Health Professions, and decided in 2005 to move there and study with Dr. Jeffrey Kreutzer, who was well known for traumatic brain injury research with civilians. And with that, I moved through this timeline that I want you guys to talk about, that I want to talk about. I received my PhD in 2008. Then I also I did a postdoctoral fellowship after that for about 3 more years. And then I joined the faculty in the Department of Occupational Therapy at VCU. First as not tenure track, but as a term faculty with annual contract. In 2014, I moved to tenure track. And then when it came to 2017, a big event happened in my life. My husband at the time, got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And as I tried to juggle my disability and everything else and trying to get tenure, I also was trying to keep my husband alive. So I went on and I tried to do that. My husband passed away in 2018. He succumbed to the pancreatic cancer. I still tried to make it work, but everything started falling apart because he helped me hold everything together, especially with a disability. And so I had to change my focus. I thought about quitting being on tenure because they told me I wouldn't have a chance. And I actually went ahead and decided to stay and change departments and try to do some things where I could handle my disability. I recognized that I needed more help, and I reached out to get accommodations, which I hadn't had in the past, particularly as a worker. And then I also worked towards getting grants and also a lot of publications with a lot of the mentors that I have. These are some of the thoughts and misconceptions and microaggressions that I went through. A lot of people said that, no, you can never be an OT. no, it's too hard for you. The things that you do, you won't be able to do. You will not be able to make it through a PhD program. You will not be able to get tenure. Oh, you got one grant, but that grant is too small. It's not good enough. And these type of things, these are the things that I consistently heard, but it would not allow me, I would not give up. And basically, next slide, I have relied on my patience, my perseverance, and my tenacity to be a person that I don't think you have that, Monique, but it's a slide that I had shown a picture of all of my mentors right here. All of the people that I used that helped me to get where I wanted to go. And those, starting with those that helped me get interested in research, all the way to individuals I am working with now to publish and to try to get tenure. So I accepted that help, but I knew I had to keep on trucking. I knew I had to have that patience, that perseverance, and that tenacity to make it through. And so I'm hoping I did that in 14 minutes. And I yield this to Dr. Pappas.
That was spectacular. That was absolutely spectacular. Even given the technical difficulties that we had at the beginning, you brought it in on time. Brilliant, brilliantly done. Next, I'd like to, as you said, Kelly, to yield to Dr. Monique Papadis. I'm so sorry, Papadis. Monique, over to you.
Okay. So I'm going to kind of share my experiences, as we're all progressing towards success in academia, as well as in our efforts in brain injury research. So I always share this slide as my roller coaster ride to TBI research. Just how kind of different things came into and out of my life that kind of positioned me into traumatic brain injury research. So it really started off, after me going to school, getting my bachelor's degree in biology and thinking that I wanted to work in the lab. After I graduated, it was really hard finding a job. Oftentimes they would say, oh, you don't have, a master's or PhD. So no one wanted to hire me to work in the lab. So I was just thankful for my sister-in-law who mentioned me to the head charge nurse at Memorial Hermann in Houston. And I met with her and she brought me on and essentially trained me in the field of telemetry. So, here's just kind of one example of, someone providing an opportunity for me. So after kind of working and, the stress of being responsible for anyone that's on a pacemaker, anyone that has a pacemaker, or anyone that is on telemetry or being heart monitored, that like their lives were in my hand. And so that was an extremely stressful job, given that I had to, monitor everyone's heart that was for the entire hospital. And so I really wanted to, kind of do something a little different. I fell in love with working in the healthcare industry. And so I decided to go to the Dominican Republic and do a program that's a public health program. So I got to work in the community, do needs assessments. And, I just really fell in love with public health. During that time, what did people say? Oh, why are you going to the Dominican Republic? Do you even speak Spanish? Yes, I do. So, it's just similar to kind of what Kelly was mentioning, kind of aggressions and people placing their own biases on you without even, asking. So that experience really opened the door for me. And I went back to my university and I said, I'm having a really hard time. No one really wants this bachelor's of biology. So she was like, oh, well, you only need a few classes and you'll have your psychology degree. So that's what I did. And that was the best decision because by having my degree in psychology opened up and there was a position available to work at Tier Memorial Hermann in Houston, working in the neuro ICU of recruiting individuals with traumatic brain injury. So this is where everything started. And this was in 2004. And so I was just really grateful for the opportunity. The fact that I was bilingual opened that door for me. And the fact that I had that previous experience in the Dominican Republic also opened that door for me because that experience gave me, to say that, I can, approach people. I can do assessments with individuals, health assessments. And so, but once I got that job and people found out that I was working in the neuro ICU at Ben Taub, like, how did you get that job? It's like, but I'm very grateful for these two, similar to Kelly. These two women, Dr. Sander, both neuropsychologists, really were the ones that believed in me, and I'm not going to cry, and opened the door for me and trained me. And I'm just very, very thankful. So I wanted to have a slide for them just to show that, there are many women out there that are out there supporting other women. And so during the experiences of working with individuals with traumatic brain injury and their families, I just fell in love with working with them. And I immediately saw the needs that they had. And so, and then I got this kind of drive for, to get graduate education. And so I went back to school. My mentors, they supported me going back to school. They're the one who planted the seed about even thinking about getting a PhD. And Memorial Hermann helped pay for some of my schooling. So I'm just forever grateful. And during those experiences, I saw that there was a need for, I kept wondering why when I would go into the homes of individuals who were either Hispanic or Black, they didn't know anything about their traumatic brain injury and the consequences of the injury and the symptoms, and that the symptoms were related to their brain injury, how severe their injury was. And so that's when I said, okay, what can I do to help? And so I based my whole master's education around addressing that need with the development of this educational material, developing an intervention where I went back to that same community and educated them and provided education to them in English and Spanish. So this was kind of, my first publication in TBI as a first author. And then, so again, like I said, they supported me to continue my education. I fell in love with the field of social work. It was a natural fit for me because I'm always connecting people to resources. And so this, kind of opportunities where I was still working at TIER. Again, I developed so many skills during my graduate education that helped also the research center where I did, data analyses for them, qualitative data analyses. And so my field, my work just really opened up. And so, when I was first started in my graduate program, I'll never forget, I was, a professor emailed me saying, oh, because they had heard that that here's this new student who already has publications. And I was the only one apparently that have started the program with already publications. And, he was like, oh, you can work with me. I have so much data. And when we met and happened to just casually meet in front of the elevator, and I was like, hi, I'm Monique Papadis. You had sent me an email, and I could see his face change. And because of my name, I guess he didn't know that I was African American. And after that point, I sent an email, followed up, never heard from him again. And I would see this professor the whole time during my PhD. And so this is kind of just, again, just a snippet of kind of the experiences. And I've never talked about this with anyone. Yeah, these experiences that I'm sharing, this is my first time. But I think people should know, not just hear all the great things that happen, but some of the challenges that we experience. And so, it was really, this is here, but it's not really a negative. I mean, the fact is that in my position, there was no other higher position for me. Apparently, a position could not be created for me at that time. So it was kind of like, okay, I have a PhD, now what? I had a pre-doctoral fellowship through Neidler. I was, doing a lot within rehab organizations, getting awards for my research. But, just not really acknowledged oftentimes, in these spaces of very well-known, and I will never mention their name, top brain injury professionals that everyone goes crazy about, to this day still do not acknowledge me when we're in the same space. And so, these are things that we have to go through and deal with, but I don't let that stop me from keeping doing what I'm doing. And still, my whole goal, how can I make the lives of people with brain injury better? And so I don't need their approval to do that. So that caused me to go into academia, right? Like, I had not thought about going in academia. I thought I was forever going to work in a research institute. But that opened so many doors for me, in resources, additional training. When I started at the University of Texas Medical Branch, I was really geared towards a specific topic, kind of outside of TBI, working in stroke and cancer prevention. That opened a door for me. Within 6 months, I was named kind of the director of one of the projects. And so that opened new doors for me. But I was kind of getting away from TBI. And so I kept saying, no, I want to do more TBI work. So I became a collaborator with the TBI model systems at TIER. But then during that time, I wanted to get my own grant. But they kept saying, no, don't worry about getting another grant. We're supporting you. But it was still deep in my heart, to get my own work, because that's what I'm, my own studies, because that's just my personality. But I worry about that. And I got funding, support from the Pepper Center to work in the area of aging, which opened a whole nother world for me. And so it took several years. It took 3.5 years before I was on the side writing my own grant. Then I kind of put my foot down and said, I'm submitting this grant. And so thankfully I did, because if I did not, I probably wouldn't have funding to support my salary. So here now I'm funded with my own salary that I received from this grant. And so I'm striving to reach this tenure and that we're all talking about. And beyond that, right? It's not just about achieving tenure, but just showing that we're doing more, contributing to our field in brain injury research, as well as contributing to our institutions, to our students that we work with, just to move the field forward. So I just wanted to end with kind of some of these things. Just, I never let anyone kind of direct my path. Many people, I would get an award, and, you know, I've been told that you only received the award because they needed to spend the money. When I got my first grant submitted, I was told that they didn't like my topic, that I needed to change the topic. And I was like, no, I'm just going to address the reviewers' comments. And thank God I did, because I was funded the second with the resubmission. I've received a service award, and people say, oh, you do too much service, instead of it just acknowledging the fact that I was recognized by my peers for my contributions. And then I just recently got an Outstanding Mentor Award. And you would think that the people closest to me would be my biggest cheerleaders, but all I've received is silence. So I just, again, what I want to share is just for anyone is just to keep moving forward. Don't let these little comments, these little things get in your way. Just set your eye on whatever goal it is that you have. If the people around you won't support you, someone else will. Find them and bring them in your circle. And so that's all I have to share.
Wow, outstanding, outstanding. And I am deeply, again, troubled by the silence from, it's like the crickets, right? You're doing incredible things, and I don't know whether it's out of envy or what it is. But what I love is the tenacity. Really, really, really inspired by that. So well done. Well done, Monique. Our final speaker on the panel is a brilliant young woman, Samira Omar, who I've known right from the beginning of when she started her PhD. So I'm really, really, really honored that she's joining this illustrious group of academics. Samira, over to you.
All good?
We can't see it yet. Nope, there we go. Brilliant.
Thank you so much for having me today. So in my segment, I'm going to go over and just share how anti-Blackness is present, how it shows up in rehabilitation and clinical care, and how it ultimately shapes life opportunities. And thank you so much to Dr. Papadis and Dr. Gary for sharing their experiences. And I hope that my presentation complements by giving some language and a little bit of insight into why those experiences play out the way that they do. Living while being Black has particular consequences, as we can see, especially when you're interacting with the healthcare system and experiencing a brain injury. What does it mean to fight for a life in a system that is meant to help you heal and feel better when you're feeling your most vulnerable? A system that is ultimately selective of who it serves. Violence, bias, judgment, and blame should never be our experiences, but unfortunately it is. And I think at this point we know that traumatic brain injury is a public health concern, and so I won't define what a traumatic brain injury is, but rather I want to state this important fact that having a traumatic discriminate. It's structural inequalities and healthcare systems that do. And the ways in which we currently have been thinking about and understanding rehabilitation care, the care continuum, community integration, and different aspects of rehab has significantly lacked consideration and interpretation for how systemic and structural forces like racialization and racism and all of its intersections shape outcomes, experiences, and life trajectories. And with this, I want to name anti-Blackness as the problem that we have. And amongst many things for Black people, this means that there's limited opportunities to engage in meaningful occupation. And that's certainly not okay. And so I want to ask this question of like, what does it mean for rehabilitation sciences in this field of traumatic brain injury that we're in? And so equity in life opportunities means recognizing that systemic barriers exist and acknowledging. And by doing so, we have to acknowledge that clinical care should make the assumption that everyone has the same opportunities to receive care and support. It ultimately fails to grapple with the unequal distribution of wealth and power that disproportionately impacts Black people. And so I want to go over a couple of key terms that I think are really important in this presentation and in the experiences that we've been hearing. Race is a socially constructed phenomenon. It's based on false assumptions that physical differences such as skin color, hair color, texture, facial features, and so forth is related to intellectual, moral, and cultural superiority. And so this is false. The concept of race has no biological basis, independent from the meanings that it holds within a societal context. Racialization comes from race, and it's the idea that those racial categories then operate on a hierarchical system, one that designates those of particular racial categories as being more superior than others, like the division that we have between folks. This also means that there are differential benefits economically, socially, and politically. Racism depends on racialization. It provides the instructions and the justifications on how individuals operate within systems and institutions according to these racial categories. And anti-Black racism is one of the most insidious forms of racism to specifically impact people who are Black. And this shows up in different spaces like policies, practices, procedures. We've all been seeing during the COVID-19 pandemic how like this virus itself has been disproportionately impacting people who are Black across North America. But it's not because of the fact that they are Black. And these issues that we've been seeing over the course of this pandemic of racial injustice and inequality, these all existed before the pandemic. And it has nothing to do with race, but more so the and social determinants of health that disproportionately impact people who are Black because society was set up that way. And so I also want to acknowledge how deep these issues are by also sharing with you that I bet many of you didn't know that we are in the International Decade for People of African Descent, 2015 to 2024. We are more than halfway through, and this was a decade that was recognized by the United Nations as a decade to recognize, build justice and development towards the atrocities that people of African descent have been experiencing all over the world. We know that racism exists on many different levels. It's not just the individual and the interpersonal, but they also exist at more higher up, systemic and institutional. Racism and racialization are determinants of health, and being Black in society, when you have a traumatic brain injury, interacting with the healthcare system that was never designed to serve you. And so how, as academics who also engage with research, and even people who are consumers of that, working in different spaces and so forth, how do we examine and interpret Black reality? Because we need a particular lens that considers the reality of Black life, because we will always be limited if the framework of reference is based on the inference of non-Black reality. And so one way to do this is through intersectionality. Intersectionality is an analytical tool that can be used to understand, interpret, and make sense of the complexities and nuances of the everyday experiences of, particularly for people who are caught at the intersections of multiple and mutually intersecting identities. Kimberly Crenshaw coined this term back in 1989 as a way to highlight and recognize that Black women faced a special kind of discrimination, such as that as being a woman, which together created a new kind of discrimination that needed to be accounted for. Intersectionality is really important because it unveils the invisible dominant narratives that structure society and benefit some while harming others. For example, we know that racial and ethnic minorities are at an increased risk for hospitalization due to traumatic brain injury, have also been reported to use healthcare services less frequently and experience poor health outcomes compared to people who are white. But through an intersectional lens, we see that Black people living with a traumatic brain injury have unmet and unaddressed needs across the care continuum. they're also more vulnerable to the impacts of being deprived from opportunities to fulfill basic self needs and participate in meaningful occupation, which is the goal of traumatic brain injury rehabilitation. And so, equity in life and health means critically recognizing racial health disparities. And when we also acknowledge the dangers of intersectionality, because although this lens is an important tool and a lens to see how different different social identities intersect with one another to create nuanced experiences, it's also not the full story. It's a lens, it's a starting point, but it's not going to give you everything that you need to be able to understand the root causes of these disparities. And so here I present to you in passing how racism in the clinical care can cost the lives of patients. And it shows up in many nuanced ways, including implicit, also known as unconscious bias in clinical care. And unconscious bias was certainly shared by our amazing speakers prior to this presentation as well. And so we can't really talk about intersectionality without talking about implicit bias, because our willingness to disrupt these processes depends on our ability action to interrupt how it operates and it shows up. And for those of you who are wondering how this happens, implicit bias is the process of associating stereotypes or attitudes towards categories of people without conscious awareness. It's the attitudes that reflexively alter our perceptions and understandings of our experiences, which affect our behavior, our interactions, and our decision makings. But I also want to note that implicit or unconscious bias is not the same as conscious racism and other forms of conscious bias, which still exists and definitely still needs to be addressed. But in this segment, when I'm talking about implicit bias, I'm talking about people who consciously and genuinely believe in fairness, equity, and equality, but despite all of these stated beliefs, they hold unconscious biases that can lead them to act and react in ways that are in odds with their values. And so unconscious bias can show up in so many different ways in the clinical care journey, including the decisions that are made regarding which treatment is available to patients. And so for so many years, I've been asking myself the same question. What does it take for Black life to have a life worth living? What does it mean to live in a world where being Black means something, a world where the color of your skin matters in all aspects of your living, a world where even the people who are meant to provide you care and support are selective of who they want to do that for? How do you live a good life when society has decided that you aren't even worth it, that you're not valuable, and that time and time and again you're turned away, you're not cared for? And so violence, bias, judgment, and blame shouldn't be anyone's experiences navigating health institutions. Especially when we come to them when we're at our most vulnerable. But the sad reality is that this is the case. Systemic barriers shape life opportunities, life trajectories, opportunities to heal from trauma, to be supported in engaging in meaningful activities, to participate in occupations that are important to us, whether it's paid or not paid. So where does that leave us? What does it mean to have these conditions? How can rehabilitation support life opportunities for Black communities and all the intersections that make us unique and different? And ultimately, what is our role in these spaces? I did a scoping review about integrated care pathways for Black people experiencing a traumatic brain injury, and I'm not going to go over the results right now. There's a pre-recording available as part of the conference, and so if you're interested in wanting to know a little bit more about what I did and what I found out, I'll encourage you to check that out. Ultimately, I found that Black patients, not surprisingly, are largely denied access to hospital care, experience lower rates of necessary protocol treatment, poor quality of care, lack access to rehab, less likely to be discharged to other forms of care. And ultimately, being Black becomes synonymous for being unmarried, less educated, more prone to violent mechanisms of injury, an at-risk population, and being unproductive. And so, how does the way that we use race and read about it in research then factor into tools that are used, assessments, intervention planning? And when we talk about certain groups of marginalized people, like people who are Black, as being unproductive, unemployed, unmarried, and so forth, we have to ask ourselves what narratives are being advanced? And how does this collectively impact our everyday living, occupation, and the way that we participate and do things in our everyday lives? And so critical self-reflection happens when we question our own assumptions and biases to better understand why we make the decisions that we do and their impacts on others. Why did we create that version of a care plan, that type of analysis, ask that particular question, draft that narrative? What could have been different had you have considered the reality of people who are Black in health and in society? Our assumptions and biases shape outcomes and life possibilities. Health educators, like, we all have a responsibility to honestly grapple with the reality of race, anti-Black racism, and racial, the geographical locations of which we're situated in. And in doing so, also own our parts in perpetuating these systems of oppression that ultimately reinforce anti Blackness and promote white supremacy. And so, one way that this could happen is through critical self reflection. And critically reflecting on our own biases and assumptions, we can better understand how our thoughts, our actions, and our practices can hold material consequences for Black life. And so I want to leave you with this last question as more of a reflective piece that you can kind of like take as a take home message from this segment. Um, and so specifically, I want to pose to you: how does your social location and positioning influence how you experience the world, what you emphasize in your research, your care plans, and your teaching, how you evaluate and interpret others and their experiences, and then ask yourself, how do you come to know what you know? Thank you so much.
That was written. I was glued, and I knew, as I said at the beginning, that Samira was going to bring it, and she brought it. I am just very, very grateful to each of these brilliant women for, number one, their courage and their honesty in sharing their experiences of navigating academia while Black, navigating academia while being Black and a woman. I am really, really thankful for the determination that these women, these panelists, these brilliant women have shown. And you are examples, right? You are shining beacons of examples to other Black women about the opportunities and how you must not be deterred by systemic racism. You cannot and you must not be deterred by systemic racism layered with traumatic brain injury. You cannot and you must not be deterred by individuals who refuse to recognize what you bring to this. And I am so grateful that all of you have come, shared your lived experience, shared your academic work, shared your journeys as a way to influence the way the world should be looking. Because without your voice, without your powerful experiences and your willingness to share it so openly, I think nothing will change. So the advocacy that you've been doing, the work that you've been doing, applaud you. Absolutely, absolutely sending out love and gratitude to you three for all that you've done. And to Sydney, congratulations on your new role. It is so wonderful to see a man in this space. Catherine was talking about it, the importance of doing the work and having male allies that show up to speak up, because it is so, so important. I'd like you to have the last word, if you might.
Thank you very much. That was a very powerful presentation. And I will tell you that in many times, what we do on a day-to-day basis does not seem impactful. But the four of you have been doing an excellent job. I take this, it's usually my signature block. If you don't stand up, you don't stand a chance. And each of you is not letting anyone take you for granted, take these issues for granted. And please keep up that good fight. And, we need to get our generation as well as the next generation of scientists, researchers involved, and to make sure that this is a conscious and an unconscious effort to make sure that we're aware of the gender and race issues that are a deterrent of getting good health care and to performing good science. So thank you very much.